Hello and welcome to the third part of this fifth recording in the series on Azure Beginner Demo. So, what we're going to be doing in this particular recording is looking at storage spaces and how we can use that to configure the disk or to manage the disk and the volumes of our Azure virtual machines. So we have currently have on in our environment what we'll see in this diagram here. And we've been looking at these two top machines in the web tier so far. But now this time we'll go to a database tier, and what we'll do is we'll be adding additional disks to this virtual machine, this VM2, in the database tier. And then we'll also now log into the machine and use storage spaces to configure those additional data disks. So this is something that could be useful if you want to get more throughput, or if you for some reason are hitting that limitation, because in Azure at the moment you can't have a data disk beyond the 4 terabyte size. So if you want to go beyond that, what you can do is you can have additional disks, and then you can combine them together and then do some form of configuration on the virtual machine to make a bigger volume. In Windows, that could be storage spaces. In Linux, it could be RAID software. It could be a bunch of other things that you could use. So let's get right into that. So this module, or this particular recording, implementing storage spaces. Let's see what the goals are for what we're doing. So first thing, we'll do task number one. And task number one is about attaching VHDs to our Azure VM. So the goal will be to attach two additional 128 gig size data disks to this virtual machine. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to the lab virtual machine. Still have web servers from the last time. Go back to the Azure portal, and then I'll go on the virtual machines. So on the virtual machines, I'll select my VM2, and then I'll go on the disks. And on the disk, I'll go ahead and click Add Data Disk. I'll click on this drop down and click on Create Disk. And then just specify the configuration that we have in a lab document. So specify that name. Use the existing resource group, leave the account type as standard LRS. Source time is set to none, but for the size, we'll change that to 128 gigs. And we'll click on Create. So once that finished creating, we'll add another disk. This time we'll call it data02, and it will be the same size. So I think this may take just a little while, so I'll pause the recording and then I'll come back once it's finished. So that finished now. If I go ahead, if I click save, I'll just add the second one. So I'll do the same process and click on create disk. Give it a name, this time data02, and I'll change the size again to 128. Leave the resource group and the account type and the source, and then click on create. I'll pause the recording again. Once it's finished, I'll resume the recording. So now we have this. So we have 01 and 02, and then I'll go ahead and click save here. So then that will begin to apply the new disks. Again, I'll pause the recording once that's fully saved, and then I'll resume the recording and we'll proceed to the rest of the steps. So the configuration saved successfully, as you can see here. So what I can do is if I click on overview and get the public IP of this machine, and then using remote desktop connection, I'll connect to it. The username is student, and we have the password in the lab document. I'll copy and paste that and click OK. Then ask me again for this connection, click yes. And then once we log into this machine, I'll go ahead and use storage spaces to configure a simple volume. I think this may take just a little short while, so I'll pause the recording again. Okay, so fully logged into the machine now, and server manager displayed. So what I can do, or what next thing I'll do is let's go ahead and configure storage spaces. Let's bring up the goal for this particular task. So the goal is to configure a new storage space, virtual disk, and volume using native Windows tools. So if I go ahead and click on File and Storage Services, and then click on Storage Pools here, I can click on this drop down here on the task and select New Storage Pool. Then if I go to next, it's going to ask for a name. I'll put in my name, the pool name, which is Storage Pool 1, according to a lab document. And I'll go ahead and click next. It's going to ask for the disks that will be members of the pool. I'll select the 2 disks that we added earlier, and then I'll click on next. So it's going to ask us to go ahead and click create. So we go ahead and click create. And at the end of this, we'll have a new storage pool. So I will select this option to create a virtual disk when this wizard closes. So now we have a pool of disks. Now we want to create a virtual disk from that pool of physical disks. So if I tick that option and then if I click close, it's going to bring up this option here for select the storage pool. So I select my storage pool and click OK. And then it's going to bring up the new virtual disk wizard. So if I click next on this page, and for the virtual disk, I'll give it a name, virtual disk 1, right? And then I'll go ahead and click next. So on this inclusion awareness, I'll click next here. So on this page to select the storage layout, I'll select simple and then I'll click next. So it's asking if it's going to be thin, provisioned, or fixed. I'll leave it at fixed and then click next on that. If you ask me to specify the size, I'll just select the option to use the maximum size and then click next. And then if I go ahead and click create, that will create the virtual disks. And then I'll ensure that I leave this option selected to create a volume when this wizard closes. So if I close this, it's going to bring up the new volume wizard. So we've created a storage space, then a virtual disk, and now a volume. So if I go ahead and click next, and for the under select the server and disk, I only have a single virtual disk, so I'll select that and click next. The volume size, I'll leave that set to the maximum also, and then I'll click next. The drive letter, I'll leave that set to F, and then I'll click next. So under the new volume here, we can call it whatever volume name I want to call it. New data vol, whatever. And then leave the file system as NTFS and the allocation as default. And then click next and then click create to confirm. And then what will happen is we'll have a new volume. So this is essentially saying the same tools that you use to manage disks and volume on an on-prem VM, you can use those same tools to manage your disks and volumes in your Azure VMs. So that's essentially what we're demonstrating here. Now we have a new data volume here with the size, and now we can begin to store our data on that, and that is spread across 2 disks in Azure, to 128 gig disks that we added in Azure. And of course, we are still benefiting from the standard LRS storage, which will replicate data 3 times within the Azure storage stamp. Okay, that being said, I think that's it now. So if I go ahead and minimize out of this, not out of the main machine, but out of the other machines. So the next thing that I'll do is we're going to clean up our environment. So that's the last one. So we're going to just clean up our Azure environment, and I'll just go ahead and run this command here. So going to PowerShell, I'll use CLS to clear the screen, and I'll paste that command and type A and press enter. Let's move on. So now I'm going to import the module that will clean up the environment. Enter, and then to allow, and then finally I'll just run that command here to remove 20533D environment. Enter to that, put in my email address, put in my password, and now it's going to ask me to say it's detected that I'm on lab 4. So it does that by looking at the name of the resource group. So it's detected I'm on lab 4, and it's going to delete all resources within delete all resource groups with name starting with this. So that's what it's going to do. Type yes to proceed and press enter, and then it's going to begin the deletion. And at the end of this, if I go back to my resource groups, this resource group will be gone completely, and all the resources in it will also be gone. So this currently 18 items. If I refresh that, it's in the process of deleting some of the resources. So I think that will take, I think I put in an estimated time here. So it takes about 12 minutes to wipe everything. So just give it a bit of time. And then once it's done, you're ready to move on to the next lab in this series. So what are we going to be doing next? Let's go back to on the instructions, and we'll be doing lab number 5 next. So what we're covering in lab number 5. Lab number 5 is about implementing Azure App Service. So we'll be looking at implementing web apps, um, and first exercise will be creating web apps in Azure, and then we'll be deploying code into that web app from Visual Studio. We'll be publishing code directly to it, and then we'll manage the web app. So we'll be using features like deployment slots and all the other features. We'll be downloading the publishing file, and we'll be using that to publish and then swap the different slots. So, and then finally, we'll implement Traffic Manager, which is load balancing and redundancy across regions. So we'll implement that finally. And that will be in the very next recording. So thanks very much for watching this, and I'll see you in the next lab. Have fun.